They clapped for him, again. I was 3 seats down from the coffee machine, half listening to the quarterly performance call while pretending to fix the formatting on a PowerPoint slide that had already been perfect since Tuesday. Let's give a round of applause to Jason, our boss said, like he was announcing a Nobel laureate and not a guy whose main skill set was forwarding emails and using the word synergy like it paid rent. Jason closed the Holt Logistics deal and exceeded KPIs. Amazing work, man. Everyone cheered like we hadn't all seen him panic in the break room for 2 straight weeks, asking what an API even was. And me? I built the damn architecture for the Holt rollout. I trained the junior devs, stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting the ops scheduler when the system kept crashing mid-deploy. Jason once accidentally pushed a test environment live and somehow still walked away with a bonus and a promotion. Me? I got a $10 Starbucks gift card and a "we'll circle back next cycle" from our boss, Greg. Greg, who wore sweatshirts with college names he didn't attend and called every woman champ. "You're such a rock," he told me after the call. "Everyone leans on you. I know a promotion's overdue, but budget constraints. You get it, right?" I smiled. The kind of smile you wear like armor. Because if you flinch, they'll shove more weight on your back and call it trust. It was the third time in 2 years that the budget constraints only seemed to apply to me and not to the guys who spent half the workday arguing about fantasy football and which crypto was about to pop. That night, I closed my work laptop like it was a coffin lid and opened the real one. My machine, my world. I wasn't going to vent. I wasn't going to rage tweet. I was going to build. My GitHub repo waited like a half-loaded weapon. The AI workflow tool I'd been quietly coding for the last 6 months lit up the screen. Modular, clean, elegant, and untraceable. Every line of code written on my own hardware, off the clock, in a coffee shop, or under the yellowish kitchen light while reheating leftover lo mein. I didn't need Greg's permission to matter. And listen, if you've ever been gaslit by your own HR department, or clapped through someone else's promotion just to keep your job intact, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It keeps this story going, and honestly, it helps the team that brings these confessions to light. Back to it. I'd been sitting on a prototype for an AI-based task orchestration engine, one that could track, assign, and redirect operations in real time, with fewer dropped handoffs than Greg had excuses. It started as a side hobby after the third team restructure. Then it got real. I'd pitched it cold once just to see. A small healthcare tech startup liked the idea but passed on the MVP. Said it wasn't market ready. Fine, that lit a bigger fire. Every skipped raise became a new module. Every time Greg said, "You're just so dependable," like it was a compliment instead of a leash, I refined the scheduler logic. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and test latency thresholds before work. Spend my weekends running load tests. I wasn't bitter. I was busy. Busy rewriting the playbook they thought I'd die holding. Then came March. The healthcare startup reached out again. Said they were ready to try a pilot. Needed internal approval from their ops team, but if it passed testing, they'd sign. My stomach did a slow, suspicious flip, because I wasn't some wild-eyed founder with a garage and a dream. I was still on payroll at a company that loved to claim ownership over every breath I took during office hours, and sometimes after. So I dug out my offer letter. Page 3, Clause 7.3, the employee retains all rights to intellectual property developed independently, using non-company resources, outside of employer-paid hours. It was like finding a trapdoor in a prison cell. I printed that page, highlighted it, and slipped it into the red folder where I kept every ignored raise request, every thank you email, every let's talk in Q3, because something told me I was going to need it. They didn't know I had a side project. They didn't know I'd been building an exit plan in silence, but they were about to find out. The trick is to make your ambition look like burnout. I started leaving the office right at 5. No more staying late to fix someone else's spaghetti code. No more answering Slack messages at 10:30 p.m. because Greg just had one last question. I became boring on purpose. No more volunteering to lead Sprint Retro S. No more quick fixes before the demo. "Linda must be tired," they whispered. "She used to be so committed." Sure, that's what it looked like. But every hour I stopped giving them, I gave to myself. Nights became sacred. I lit a lavender candle like it was a boundary line. Phone flipped over. Work laptop stuffed under a pile of unpaid dental bills. I'd boot up my real machine, my Frankenstein laptop with half the keys faded from overuse, and open the project I called Sparrow. Sparrow was sleek. Sparrow didn't care about Greg's quarterly goals. Sparrow wasn't designed to help a company that forgot how to thank its people. Sparrow watched task flows in real time, flagged bottlenecks before they became blockages, and redirected assignments based on historical performance and capacity. Basically, Sparrow did Greg's job, but without the fragile ego and the cheap cologne. I hosted everything on private servers outside the country. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd seen our legal team try to retroactively claim someone's open source work just because he installed a font pack on his work laptop. Not me. I didn't even check my personal email from the office network. Progress was slow, but God, it was mine. Every tiny bug fixed felt like stealing a brick from the wall they'd built around me. By December, I had a working prototype. By January, a pilot-ready version. Then came the cold email. Hi Linda, not sure if you remember us. We chatted briefly last year when you were testing out your ops engine. We're rolling out a new backend system and wondered if you're open to a small-scale beta. Nothing formal, just a 2-week test. If it works, we'll discuss licensing. Best Raymond CTO, Hallbrook Health Tech. I stared at that email for 15 straight minutes, unsure whether to cry or scream. Instead, I sent him a clean build and a detailed onboarding doc. 2 hours later, he replied, looks amazing, onboarding this week. Don't tell anyone, but I'm rooting for you. I didn't tell anyone, not HR, not my closest coworker, not even my sister. 'Cause here's what I knew. The moment people like Greg think you've got something better going on, they'll find a way to make it theirs. My contract was like one of those trashy hotel towels, full of holes and over-bleached. But I knew the one clause that mattered. Clause 7.3. I had read it 100 times by then, but that night, I read it again. The employee retains all rights to intellectual property developed independently, using non-company resources, outside of employer-paid hours. Every time I read it, it got sweeter. I printed the page, just one, highlighted the clause in yellow, underlined the last sentence in red, and slipped it into the folder where I kept the rest of my quiet little war chest. That folder was growing fat now. Screenshots of Slack messages where Greg assigned me credit but gave Jason the praise. Emails where HR used phrases like we want to reward your loyalty, just not yet. All the PowerPoints I ghostwrote for execs that got them bonuses while I got vague promises. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, because there's a difference between being bitter and being done. And I was done waiting for someone else to see my value. Let Jason ride his mediocre elevator to middle management. I had Sparrow. And a clause that said she was all mine. We landed the Blakewell account on a Thursday. It was a whale. A lumbering, bureaucratic, enterprise-sized mess with enough red tape to gift-wrap a small nation. But my team pulled it off. I'd spent 3 months untangling their operations backlog, rebuilding half the onboarding flow from scratch, and calming a pissed-off client manager who thought Agile meant we don't document anything. And how did Greg announce it during the exec call? I just want to give a shout-out to everyone who touched this win, he said, casually leaning back like a proud little league coach. A lot of moving parts, but hey, we delivered. That's what leadership looks like. Then he winked on a Zoom call to the VP. I muted my mic and stared at my keyboard like it owed me an apology. I'd written the actual delivery plan, mapped every integration point, and trained the new guy on how to not completely crash the SSO login server. But sure, everyone touched it. By everyone, Greg meant Jason, and by touched he meant he'd forwarded my emails and changed the font before pasting them into the pitch deck. The VP smiled. Impressive work, Greg. This is what we've been looking for from your department. My stomach dropped into my shoes. Then came the kicker. HR dropped into my DMs like a bad punchline. Hey Linda, just a heads up, we onboarded your new intern, Kevin. Can you help him get set up on Monday? Also, salary-wise, he's coming in at $61,500. Just FYI, since he'll be shadowing you. I stared at the message, blinking. $61,000 for Kevin. Kevin, who'd spelled database with 2 STKs in his resume. Kevin, who asked in his interview if he'd get Fridays off because that's kind of his recharge day. Kevin was making 94% of my salary. I'd been here 7 years. I didn't respond. I didn't scream. Didn't even finish my lukewarm coffee. I just opened Sparrow. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. Raymond again. Pilot works beautifully. Just got internal approval to greenlight. We're officially your second beta client. Let's discuss post-trial licensing next week. Second client. I sat back in my chair and stared at the little blinking cursor on my screen. It felt alive. 2 clients, 1 product, 0 permissions asked. I should have felt euphoric. I should have popped champagne or at least cracked open the emergency Oreos stashed in my bottom drawer. But all I felt was this pressure. Like I was holding a balloon that would pop the second I let go. Because I knew. The moment this got public, hell, the moment anyone in the company caught wind of what I'd built, they'd come for it. Greg would pivot from "you've been so quiet lately" to "we're launching this together," right? Faster than he bailed on group lunches when the bill came. HR would pull out some dusty clause from 2015 that mentioned cooperative innovation. Legal would pretend my home Wi-Fi belonged to the company because I once took a Zoom call from my couch. I wasn't ready for war. Not yet, but I was close. I made a list that night, not a vision board, not a dream journal. A list. Review backups of Sparrow. Scrub metadata from all public demos. Set up third-party timestamp logging. Verify contract clause with employment attorney, silent consult. Draft statement public but vague because it was coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But eventually someone in that building would figure out I wasn't the silent workhorse anymore. I was the quiet fuse under their feet, and they were still holding the match. I posted it with shaking hands, not a launch party, not a tech blog deep dive, just a single, polite sentence that fit neatly between photos of people's conference lanyards and were hiring posts. Excited to officially launch our product. Thanks to those who believed in the vision early. That was it. No taglines, no hashtags, no mention of Greg, the company, or the years I spent duct taping their chaos together with grace and unpaid overtime. Just a quiet release. A whisper. I closed my laptop and went to make a sandwich, thinking maybe 5 people would like it, 3 out of politeness, and 2 because they thought it was about a dog rescue. But by the time I finished washing the knife, there were 47 comments. Wait, you built this? Been following since your beta talk, congrats. I showed this to my team last quarter, amazing execution. You just raised the bar for ops tools. Can we talk about a partnership? Then came the DMs, 3 journalists. One from a SAS newsletter I'd subscribed to but never imagined hearing from. One from a startup podcast that once ghosted my cold email. And one from a mid-tier tech reporter who opened with, saw your LinkedIn post, looks like you've been busy. My phone started buzzing like a dying blender. The 6th buzz wasn't a stranger, it was Greg. Greg, we need to talk. Urgent. 5 minutes later, Greg, just saw your post. You should have run this by leadership. Followed by, Greg, call me now. The shift was immediate, like a calm lake turning black under a storm front. I didn't answer. I didn't even open the message thread. I just silenced my phone and sat back. The clock on my microwave said 2:43 p.m. By 2:49, my inbox had a message from a VC firm I'd pitched 8 months ago and never heard back from. The partner, Janelle, wrote, saw your product drop. Impressive traction. Can we hop on a call today? 15 mins. I hadn't even announced my clients yet. Hadn't shown a demo, but the idea was out, and that was all it took. LinkedIn wasn't just a platform, it was a flare gun, and I had just lit the sky up. I opened Greg's messages again. Read them slowly this time. We need to talk. You should have run this by leadership. Call me now. The gall. Like I'd just borrowed the company stapler and opened a competing office. Like he forgot every ignored raise request. Every Friday night I stayed past dinner to save his deliverables. Leadership? Greg couldn't lead his way out of a group chat. Still, I could hear the next moves playing out already. Legal would start quietly pulling my system access logs. HR would schedule a quick sync under the guise of a wellness check. Some overpaid consultant in a glass office would try to draft an IP claim based on a Slack message I sent in 2021 that vaguely mentioned automation. They were going to come hard, so I did something small. I backed up Sparrow to a second off-site repository. I verified the server logs, and I added one new clause to my consulting proposal doc. Client must confirm full legal separation from previous employer. No conflicts, because this wasn't just a side project anymore. This was survival. This was me choosing to be loud after years of being leveraged in silence. And somewhere inside the polished chaos of Greg's rapidly crumbling empire, I knew a storm was already forming. I just wasn't going to be the one getting soaked. They didn't even put it on my calendar. No meeting invite. No time slot. Just an email from executive admin. Please be in conference room C at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Per CEO request. No subject line. No attachments. No context. It read like a summons. I stared at it for 10 full seconds, then calmly closed the tab, stood up, and walked to the printer with a different kind of focus. The red folder came with me. I'd kept it buried in my filing cabinet under expired insurance forms and a faded Valentine's card from my niece. Inside were the receipts, literal and metaphorical. Page 3, clause 7.3 from my original job offer, highlighted and dated. Timestamps from my private GitHub. Server logs showing nightly check-ins from my home IP. Screenshots of early design drafts, each watermarked with a time and date from after 6 p.m. Just for flavor, an org chart from 6 months ago showing Greg had removed my name from the client-facing deck without telling me. This wasn't prep, this was armor. That morning I wore a charcoal blazer, no jewelry, no makeup. Hair pulled back. I looked like someone ready to give a eulogy or file a lawsuit. At 9:59 I walked into conference room C. They were already there. Greg at the head, doing his best imitation of composed. 2 board members flanking him. Legal counsel, someone I didn't recognize, sat across from an empty chair clearly meant for me. Linda, Greg said, fake casual. Glad you could join us, I said nothing. Just sat down, unzipped my bag, and placed the red folder directly in front of me. You've been busy, he said, a smile twitching at the edge of his mouth like a glitch. I kept my face neutral. We were surprised to see your announcement yesterday, he continued. Like I'd announced an affair, not a product. It's raised a few concerns internally, mainly around IP and conflict of interest. I waited. That's when he dropped the act. You built it while employed here, he said, eyes narrowing. That makes it ours. We own your code, sweetheart. One of the board members, a gray-haired man who once called me Lisa for 6 months, actually chuckled. Greg turned to legal like a game show host tossing to a lifeline. Don't you walk her through what that means? The lawyer, a man in a slim gray suit with the dead eyes of someone billing by the hour, opened a folder and began to speak in the practiced, low voice of corporate enforcement. Words like proprietary overlap and fiduciary obligation floated across the table like smoke. I let him finish. Didn't blink. Then, without a word, I slid my red folder across the table and flipped it open to page 3. Clause 7.3. Highlighted, underlined, Time-stamped, signed. Their lawyer glanced down, paused. Greg kept talking. Look, we're not trying to be punitive here, Linda, but you know how this looks. Launching a product while on payroll, I know exactly how it looks, I said finally. My voice was calm, not cold, just done. That's why everything I built was on my own hardware, outside of work hours, with third-party logging to verify development timelines. Their lawyer was still reading. Now frowning, Greg leaned forward. Linda, come on, you don't really think you signed it, I said, pointing to the clause. Your HR team drafted this contract. Your signature is on the bottom of the page. I haven't used company resources. I haven't breached confidentiality. I've got logs, witnesses, and backup servers in 3 separate data centers. The lawyer looked up, not at Greg, at me. And for the first time all morning, I saw it. Doubt. Greg's smile faltered. Lawyer reached for the next page. The room went quiet. And in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't just defending my product. I was defending my freedom, and I was winning. The lawyer cleared his throat like he was about to read me my Miranda rights. He pulled out a legal pad, licked his finger, and started flipping pages like we were in a courtroom instead of a sterile conference room where the water cooler still whined when it refilled. We take these matters seriously, he said, adjusting his tie. When an employee develops a product, any product, while under an active employment contract, there are presumptions of ownership, especially in industries where overlap may occur. He looked up like he expected me to crumble. I didn't. He went on. There are moral obligations, fiduciary responsibilities to act in the best interest of the company while under our payroll. Even if you believe the project was separate, the perception of competition or conflict can be enough to trigger legal action. His voice was buttered with authority, confident, practiced. I could tell he'd done this before, scared someone into silence, into surrender. Greg sat back with a smug half-smile, tapping a pen like it was a gavel. One board member was watching my face for cracks. The other was scrolling his phone like this was all just a formality. It wasn't. I let the lawyer finish his monologue, every buzzword, every hypothetical clause he pretended applied to me. Then I reached back into my red folder. Not a stack of documents, not a binder of messy defenses, just one page, single-sided, printed the night I posted Sparrow's launch announcement when I knew this exact day would come. I slid it across the table and said, "This is my original offer letter. Paragraph 3, Clause 7.3. Please read it carefully." The lawyer barely glanced down before launching into his next paragraph, something about duty of loyalty. "Read it," I said again. Calm, no smile, no anger, just certainty. He blinked, then finally looked. His eyes scanned the top, dropped halfway down, paused, a small twitch at the corner of his mouth. He leaned in, read the line again, this time slower. I already knew which one stopped him cold. Independent projects developed outside of employer-paid hours and without use of company resources remain the sole intellectual property of the employee. His posture shifted, a subtle straightening. He read the line again. Greg leaned forward. What does it say?" The lawyer didn't answer. I did. "It says the one thing you never thought I'd actually read," I said, folding my hands. "You gave me the freedom to build as long as I kept it separate." And I did. Every single line of code. Off hours, off network, my laptop, my accounts, my clients. Greg grabbed the paper, scanned it, then looked at legal like do something. But the lawyer had gone quiet. He flipped the page, checked the signature. His, from 7 years ago. Same signature still stamped on my employment record. Same contract I'd been renewing by inertia every year while promotions got delayed and raises got reallocated. That clause. It scrubbed it from newer hires contracts 2 years ago, but no one ever updated mine because I wasn't supposed to matter enough to read it. I sat back in my chair, hands still folded, calm, not victorious, not yet, but immune. The board member who had chuckled earlier was no longer amused. Greg looked like a man watching a magic trick go wrong in slow motion. And legal? He closed the folder and said nothing. That silence, that was the switch flipping. They weren't in control anymore. I was. The lawyer's voice cracked like a radio losing signal. He cleared his throat once, then again, eyes darting between the printed clause and Greg's increasingly panicked face. I watched it happen in real time, the power transfer. Up until that moment, I was just another employee in their eyes, a middle cog, a loyal mule with a decent GPA and a team player attitude. But now, I was a liability with receipts. The lawyer leaned sideways, whispering something sharp into Greg's ear, fast, clipped words behind a fake cough. Greg's face went blotchy, patches of crimson crawling up from his collar like rage trying to claw its way out. "What?" he hissed too loud. "You're saying she?" He didn't finish. I stayed quiet, let them flail. Greg snatched the paper off the table like it might bite him. He skimmed it, eyes narrowing. Then he turned it toward the lawyer. "This isn't the standard contract," he barked. "Why is this still active?" I believe it's one of the legacy agreements," the lawyer stammered. "Pre-update." Greg spun to me like a sheriff in an old western. "Did you know about this?" I met his eyes. Of course I did. He blinked, caught completely off guard. "This is your signature, right?" I asked, tapping the bottom of the page with one finger. Greg looked to the lawyer. The lawyer looked away. Silence again. The kind that hurts to sit in. Behind Greg, the board members were no longer pretending to be engaged. One was checking his watch. The other was leaning back, arms crossed, mouth a tight line, because now they understood this wasn't just a personnel issue. This was a legal minefield. If they pushed me, I'd walk straight to the press, the investors, hell, maybe even a courtroom, and they wouldn't just lose Sparrow. They'd lose credibility. Greg muttered something under his breath and slammed the paper onto the table. Should have disclosed it, he said, weak, reaching. I followed every line of my contract, I replied, calm. I even smiled a little. You just assumed I wouldn't. The lawyer finally spoke. Legally, she's on solid ground. If these logs and timestamps hold up, and from what I've seen they likely do, there's no enforceable claim of ownership. Greg looked like someone had pulled his spine out. That's when I leaned back in my chair slowly and crossed one leg over the other. Subtle. Is the kind of posture you earn after being underestimated for 7 years straight. Do you need a copy of my GitHub logs? I asked. They're time-synced, with third-party verification. The lawyer didn't answer. He just sat there, quietly recalculating whatever strategy they thought they had. Because here's the truth no one at that table wanted to say out loud they lost. Not loudly. Not with slamming doors or viral tweets. But silently, efficiently, and completely. With one clause, one outdated oversight they never thought would come back to bite them. And me? I didn't have to raise my voice. I just had to raise the right page. The only person who hadn't said a word the entire meeting stood up. Charles Greer, lead investor, majority stakeholder. The kind of man who wore silence like armor and only spoke when it had the weight to shatter ceilings. I'd seen him maybe twice in 7 years. Once on a pre-recorded welcome video during an all-hands, and once in the elevator when he looked at me like I was part of the furniture. Now, he rose slowly from his chair at the far end of the table, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the page in front of Greg. Then, without looking at anyone in particular, he said it. She's got you cornered. His voice wasn't loud, didn't need to be. The sentence dropped like a cinder block into a bucket of nerves. Greg flinched. Legal leaned back, the board members froze. I've been quiet, Charles said, finally turning toward Greg because I wanted to see how this leadership team handles pressure. Crisis. Loyalty. He gestured toward me with an open palm like I was a whiteboard he was pointing to during a lesson on how not to screw your golden goose. This is how you treat talent, he asked. Calm, sharp, no rhetorical fluff. You sit them down, humiliate them in front of the board. Call in legal like they're a thief, and for what? Because they built something better than you ever let them? Greg opened his mouth to protest, but Charles didn't wait. She followed the contract. You signed it. She did the work. You buried her under empty praise, stalled her career, and now you think you're owed her exit strategy? The room was still. The HVAC kicked on overhead, and that was the only sound. Then he turned to me. Linda. I straightened but didn't speak. We're done. 3 words, but they cracked open the entire structure like a dropped wine glass. Greg's jaw twitched. Charles, with all due respect, no, Charles said. You had 7 years of her time. You don't get one more minute. He pushed back his chair, gave me a small nod, nothing dramatic, just a simple, grounded acknowledgement, and walked out. The board members followed, one after the other. Not a single word spoken, not even a backward glance. Greg stood there, stunned, one hand still on the folder like it might spontaneously rewrite itself. I gathered my things, no rush, just the methodical quiet of someone done being talked over. I stood, zipped my bag. Greg still hadn't moved. You know what the saddest part is? I said softly, not needing him to answer. You could have had a piece of it years ago. All you had to do was treat me like I mattered. Then I turned, walked to the door. As my hand hit the knob, my phone buzzed. I checked the screen. VC #3. Subject, quick chat. Saw your launch, would love to discuss a seed round. I smiled, the real kind, because I didn't just walk out of that boardroom intact, I walked out free. The glass door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking out of a meeting, I felt like I was walking off a leash. No one followed, no footsteps echoing down the hall, no strained calls of wait, Linda, can we talk? Just silence. The same kind they gave me every time I asked for promotion, a raise, or a title that matched the work I was already doing. Only now it was their silence. I stepped into the elevator and hit the ground floor like it owed me peace. As the doors slid shut, I caught a final glimpse of the boardroom through the glass wall. Greg still hunched over the table, red-faced and small, surrounded by chairs that now held more power than he did. No parting speech, no dramatic middle finger. I didn't need it. I was past rage, past revenge. I was something better, free. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone buzzed. Team lead Carla, he's melting down. Just told HR you tricked him, they're scrambling. I paused in the middle of the revolving door, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Me, tell them I won't sue if they don't drag it. 3 dots appeared. Then, Carla, consider it delivered. God, I wish I could have filmed his face. I smiled again, not a gloat. Just a small, knowing curve of the mouth. They still didn't get it. I hadn't tricked anyone. They'd written the rules. I'd just been the only one to actually read them. I stepped out into the fall air, brisk, golden, sharp like truth, and kept walking. Past the smoker's bench where I'd once cried after being passed over for a role I trained the hire for. Past the coffee cart where I'd bought Greg his almond milk lattes because he forgot his wallet again. Past the plaque out front with the company's name, etched in chrome, still pretending it meant something. I pulled out my phone again. Inbox 14 unread. The top one had no subject line, just a name I recognized from a VC firm I never thought I'd hear from again. I opened it. Linda, we saw the launch. The buzz is real. Let's talk. We've been looking for someone like you for a long time. Founders like you are rare. Below it, a term sheet, not a teaser. Not an invitation to talk. A term sheet, no begging, no convincing, they already knew. I exhaled, slow. No fireworks, no champagne, just the clarity of finally being seen, not managed. The truth is, I didn't need to burn it all down to win. I just had to stop holding it up. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.